mid-November 2025, the coastal city of Quy Nhon in Binh Dinh Province, central Vietnam, was struck by massive flooding, causing widespread damage, mass evacuations, and serious disruption to the daily lives of its residents. Heavy rains that fell for nearly a week triggered river overflows, chest-deep water inundation, and unprecedented infrastructure damage in recent years. This event was one of the most significant hydrometeorological disasters to hit central Vietnam that year. The flooding began after a low-pressure system formed over the South China Sea and moved northwestward, bringing with it high humidity that then met with warm air from the Vietnamese mainland. The meeting of these two air masses triggered persistent, heavy rains that drenched the coastal and central mountainous regions, including the city of Quy Nhon. In less than 5 days, rainfall in some areas exceeded 1,100 millimeters, far above the normal level for November. The Ha Thanh and Kon rivers, two major rivers that flow through the city and its surrounding areas, overflowed, inundating residential areas, roads, and agricultural land. The downtown area of Quy Nhon, including the Ha Thanh and Tran food districts, was submerged in up to 2 meters of water. Residents' homes, shops, schools, and other public facilities were also inundated. Many residents were forced to evacuate to higher ground, while others were trapped on the second floor or rooftops of their homes, awaiting assistance. The Binh Dinh provincial government immediately activated the emergency response system and set up evacuation posts in schools and village halls. Military and police rescue teams were deployed to evacuate residents using rubber boats and amphibious vehicles. Infrastructure damage was extensive. National highways connecting Quy Nhon with other cities in central Vietnam were cut off by landslides and erosion. Small bridges in suburban districts collapsed under the strong currents, while the city's drainage system was unable to cope with the enormous volume of water. Power was out in some areas for more than 2 days, and communications were disrupted due to submerged transmitter towers. Phu Cat Airport, located about 30 kilometers from the city center, was temporarily closed due to flooding of the runway and impassable access roads. The economic impact of the floods was profound. Thousands of hectares of rice paddies and salt pans, the primary source of livelihood for residents, were completely destroyed. Farmers reported that rice crops that were almost ready for harvest were destroyed by the floodwaters, while shrimp and fish ponds, the mainstay of Binh Dinh Province's fishery exports, were contaminated by mud and sewage. Quy Nhon Port, one of the most important ports in central Vietnam, temporarily suspended operations due to high tides and flooding of logistics areas. Initial economic losses were estimated at over 300 billion Vietnamese dong, and this figure is likely to increase as assessment and recovery processes continue. Socially, the floods caused profound trauma for residents. Many families lost their homes, possessions, and livelihoods quickly. Children were unable to attend school because school buildings were flooded or used as evacuation centers. Health services were overwhelmed with residents suffering minor injuries, skin infections, and respiratory problems due to exposure to dirty water and humid air. Local and international humanitarian organizations began to intervene to provide logistical, medical, and psychosocial assistance. The Vietnam Red Cross distributed emergency aid packages, while volunteers from various provinces came to help with the evacuation process and logistics distribution. From a social perspective, the floods deepened existing inequalities. Poor residents living along riverbanks or in low-lying areas were the most affected. Many lost their homes, belongings, and access to basic services. The government's relocation program, while crucial for long-term safety, risks fueling social conflict if it is not accompanied by community participation, fair compensation, and guaranteed access to employment and education in the new location. Children who lose their schools will face disruptions in their education. while their parents will struggle to rebuild their lives from scratch. In the long term, the psychological trauma of loss and uncertainty also needs to be addressed through ongoing mental health support services. At the policy level, the floods catalyzed a paradigm shift in urban planning and disaster risk management. The Vietnamese government, which has long recognized its vulnerability to climate change, now faces an urgent need to accelerate the implementation of adaptation policies. This includes revising urban spatial plans to avoid development in flood-prone zones, strengthening the capacity of local governments to respond to disasters, and integrating climate data into development planning. Quy Nhon can serve as a model for other coastal cities in Southeast Asia by developing a community-based early warning system, strengthening interagency coordination, and building partnerships with the private sector and international organizations. Environmentally, this flood highlights the importance of an ecosystem-based approach to disaster risk management. Deforestation in upstream areas, conversion of mangrove forests to fish ponds, and development on hillsides without proper environmental impact assessments exacerbate the city's vulnerability to flooding. In the long term, mangrove forest restoration, watershed rehabilitation, and watershed protection must be part of adaptation strategies. This approach not only reduces flood risk but also strengthens the resilience of local ecosystems and supports the livelihoods of coastal communities. Psychologically and culturally, this flood left a collective wound that will not easily heal. Many residents lost not only their homes and possessions, but also their sense of security and future certainty. In the long term, rebuilding public trust in the government and public institutions will be a challenge. This requires transparency in aid distribution, citizen participation in the recovery process, and honest communication about risks and adaptation plans. On the other hand, the solidarity that emerges amidst the crisis, whether from fellow citizens, volunteers, or the international community, provides crucial social capital for building collective resilience. The Vietnamese central government stated that the flooding in Quy Nhon is part of a trend of increasing frequency and intensity of natural disasters triggered by climate change. In the first 9 months of 2025 alone, more than 180 people were reported dead or missing due to natural disasters across the country, with national economic losses reaching over $600 million. Quy Nhon is one of the most affected cities due to its strategic location, yet its vulnerability to tropical storms and seasonal flooding. The central government has promised financial recovery assistance, including infrastructure reconstruction, direct cash assistance for affected residents, and a relocation program for those living in flood-prone areas. As a long-term response, the Binh Dinh provincial government plans to strengthen its early warning system, build flood control embankments and canals, and revise the city's spatial planning to reduce disaster risks. A program to relocate residents from red zones to safer areas is underway, despite facing social and economic challenges. Environmentalists are calling for ecosystem-based approaches, such as mangrove restoration, watershed protection, and controlled hillside development, as sustainable solutions. Universities in Vietnam are developing flood modeling systems based on satellite data and artificial intelligence to improve predictions and preparedness. The Quy Nhon floods serve as a reminder that coastal cities in Southeast Asia face a real threat from climate change. Adaptation and mitigation are no longer optional, but imperative. Citizens, governments, and the international community must work together to build disaster resilience, protect the environment, and ensure that tragedies like this do not recur in the future. Quy Nhon, once known as a peaceful and thriving port city, now faces the significant challenge of recovering and rebuilding stronger and more sustainably.